Peer Review is a series of podcasts designed to shed light on the extraordinary breadth and diversity of talent that sit in the House of Lords. The House of Lords often gets a bad rap because it is thought to be a house of cronies and it is an unelected house. But I hope through these interviews you will see that there is this extraordinary talent, there is a great knowledge and experience, and with that I leave you to draw your own conclusions. Well, my guest today is none other than the Lord Speaker himself, John McFall of Alcuith. I think that's the right way of pronouncing it, John, is it?
Alcuith.
Yeah, well, so I got it right first time, which is rarity. Dumbarton is surprising you didn't take that because you don't seem to have ever left the place, if I may say so, but I'm going to get into that in a minute. But I'm so pleased to have the opportunity of talking to you, and you're now in your 80th year. You are working flat out full time. You look as fit as a butcher's dog, which is good, so it's obviously good for you working on your 80th year. Do you not feel absolutely knackered by the end of the parliamentary period?
No, because I've loved working from my early stage. My parents had a small newsagent shop, and I was the paper boy. So I had to collect the papers early in the morning, at 6:30, take them to the shop, and on a Saturday evening, when the sports papers came in, they were called the Times and the Citizen. Times being a red paper, Citizen being a green paper. They were dropped off at the station from Glasgow, and I took them to shop, but also went round the pubs. So I got to know the pubs well without having any alcohol drunk.
And your father was also a caretaker at a school, wasn't he?
He was. He was a janitor at the school, and he was hugely well liked. And I say this with no modesty, in the sense that he was a better man than me. He was loved by all the school kids. He had a lovely temperament, and he was really interested in sport. And he took the boys' football team, and he was called John the Janny. And for years thereafter, I had people who played with him. They were 10 years or more older than me. They said, we loved John the Janny. He was great. And he left a legacy in the town from just having a humble job as a caretaker in a school.
And how proud they would have been to see you in the fine residence we're in now, in the Lords. Did they see you? They obviously saw you become an MP. Did they see you?
No, they never saw me become an MP.
Really?
Some of the community in Dumbarton would say, your mother, and she was called Jeannie, if Jeannie was here, you wouldn't get down the street for her telling you that her son was an MP.
You were born in Dumbarton,
yeah.
and you're still living in Dumbarton, I think.
Absolutely.
And are you sort of near where you were born, or?
Probably about 3/4 of a mile from where I was born. But also my first job was in Leaven Grove Park, a lovely park.
And you left school at 15, didn't you?
I left school, yeah. My first job was in the gardens, in the beds. Where my house is just now, it's only 300 yards from the first bed. So that's where I started my work. And every day I can look down and reflect on that.
And check whether the beds have been tended as well as
I think they're in a better state than I left them.
And you went to then university, having obviously left school at 15. Yeah. You went late into university. You went to Strathclyde.
Yeah.
And you did a BSc in chemistry.
Chemistry, yeah.
What gave you the interest in chemistry? Why did you suddenly have this sort of change of...
Well, actually, I would like to have been a lawyer and do law and history. But at the time, the government were providing grants for individuals kicking into secondary education in the maths and the science. And I had very much an interest in science. And I thought it would give us more financial security. So that's how I ended up taking chemistry.
And you then became a teacher?
Yes.
For quite a long time. I think till 87, 74 to 87.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You taught chemistry, I want to assume.
I did, chemistry and maths.
And that was at Dumbarton School?
No, it was in Glasgow.
In Glasgow.
It was a school called Bellarmine on the south side of Glasgow. A very working class area. Let me give you an example. At the school, we had a cottage in Ayrshire where we used to take the kids. And with quite a number of the kids on the bus on the way down, it would be the first time they'd seen cows and sheep.
Amazing.
In the area. Very important. And that weekend liberated them. And, for example, when they get in to the cottage, they would have their first meal, and we spied the ones that didn't use a knife and fork. So we say, look, stop. This is the fork, this is the knife, on that. But the kids were terrific kids, but they didn't have much opportunity in the environment from where they came. But there were lovely children there as well, and interested in parents on that. But the issue of poverty and its impact on families, struck me very much in that environment.
And what sort of class sizes were you teaching?
We were teaching about class size 30, 32.
So the class sizes had reduced at that point?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, they had reduced. Mm-hmm.
Of course, the first Labour government under Ramsay MacDonald reduced the class sizes, didn't
Absolutely.
It?
And John Wheatley was an MP for a Glasgow seat, and he put the housing bill through. And I lived in Colley Street, which was a long street of narrow and houses on either side, huge number of houses. And the Wheatley bill, the housing bill, we benefited from that because we moved to a council house in a scheme called Bellsmire as a result of that. We had outside toilets in the houses we were in Colley Street, but we had...
You had one?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how's Dunbarton changed since that time? I mean, obviously the occupations have changed.
Yeah, it was very famous for its shipyard, Denny's shipyard. In fact, it developed a hovercraft in the 60s, but it then closed. And in my constituency, which was combined with Clydebank, at one of the boundary reviews, with John Brown's shipyard there, where a lot of people from Dumbarton worked, but the traditional industries went, and there was this hiatus. I would say that now, with services and tourism, for example, we've got Loch Lomond in our area, that has been brought back a bit. But for everywhere else, with young people and employment, there are still areas that are still isolated and pretty poor.
In 1987, you had the calling to become an MP. What gave you that sort of thirst? Was it your desire to make this change, that the poverty you taught and experienced, or was there sort of always a political thing running through your family?
Well, I think William Hague, whom I went to in Japan, I got on very well, William. I think he's on record as saying that when he was 15, he had Hansard in his bed looking at it. Well, that one was not my situation there.
You've probably had Glasgow Rangers or Celtic in your...
Precisely, but I'll tell you what won. But I was always interested in social elements. That the encouragement that I got from the community was aspire and take your place in society and be governed by the rules of social engagement and decency and respect for other people. And therefore, I had a wider vision of society, and politics to me was at the centre of that. Given the conditions that there were in my town, there was only one way, and it was up. And the only vehicle for up was politics itself. So that came to me very early. And I remember I mentioned to you about living in Colley Street. On a Friday and Saturday night in the High Street, which was only about 50 yards from my house, there would be a congregation of largely men, but just talking about the events of the day. And I would be there as just an observer and listening to them. So probably assimilated some of the points that they had made about the social conditions and the need for development.
It's not always usual that someone represents as an MP the town or city that they live in, because there's always a sort of bit of baggage that goes with it. So it was remarkable, actually, that you were chosen for Dumbarton in 87. Well,
that started with a couple of my friends who were in the Labour Party. Now, I told you I had a social awareness. I mean, I remember the Nixon presidency, and I knew it back to front.
So you'd been a student of
no,
politics?
It was just a lay.
Yeah, but yes, you'd been watching it.
Yeah, I'd been watching
globally.
It. But my friends asked me to come into the Labour Party because it wasn't in the best of health at that time, as you know. And I did, but I said to them, look, I ain't going to be a councillor. I've got a job in education, I've got 4 children, that's it. So they said, no, don't worry, it only take sort of a couple of nights a month.
A gentleman MP.
Well, you know what happens to people like that. And I was secretary of the branch, and then I went to the constituency party, secretary there. And because of the turbulent times, people asked me, look, will you become chair, because there was a difficulty with that. So I did. And I think what has happened is that I kept a show on the road, and I was quite good engaging with, if you like, both sides in the Labour Party. And the MP at the time in 1983, he stood and he won by only 2 votes. And I was supporting him in that 2 votes. But he came to me a few years later and he says, look, I've had enough, I'm going to stand down. And I think you should stand. And I did. But there was a long-serving councillor there on the panel, 25 years, and George Galloway was there. So George came up and he was the chair of War and Want. But in a nice, pleasant way, I dispatched him and got
So
the selection.
George tried to become a candidate.
He did, yeah. Oh, he was on the selection list, on the short list.
Ah. Oh, well, that's a famous victory, isn't it?
I always got on well with him.
Well, there, well done. And so in 87, you became an MP. What was the House like for the Labour, an incoming Labour MP then? Because you weren't exactly in a strong position.
No, we weren't, but they were a good opposition, and there was much more of a social employment mix at that time with MPs. I remember when I got selected, somebody said to me, you're from Clydeside. What you're going to do, McFall, is you're going to go down to the House of Commons. You're going to go underneath to the bar and you'll never surface again. I said, absolutely not. So I didn't go near the bar too much. But there was this notion of Labour MPs and working class and drink. But it wasn't the case. And again, like aspiration and engaging people from different communities was really important.
And there was a rebuilding job going on.
With the Labour Party?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. In, I think, 1992, I was appointed to the Scottish Front Bench, and George Robertson was the Secretary of State. And George and I worked together in that, and our reputation with the business community was low, very low. So we had the task of engaging with business people, showing that we were serious and relevant, and that was important. And I remember putting on a conference in one of the hotels in Dumbarton on the Lochside, and it was a 5-star hotel, and we had about 200 people there, and we had Scottish Enterprise there as well, and I think our status went up as a result of that, but that was only one of the things that we had to do. We had a big engagement with the press as well. George Robertson is on record as saying to us, look, I was the Secretary-General in NATO, but I had a harder time in the Scottish Front Bench than I ever had in that position.
So you were very much involved in the rebuilding of the Labour Party. I think you were a good friend of Gordon Brown's, weren't you?
Yeah, I was.
And in fact, Gordon made you appear, didn't he?
He did make me appear. But I don't think he forgave me because I voted for Tony Blair as leader.
Well, that's an admission. I mean, looking back at your time as a Member of Parliament, you were there till 2010, so you'd started in 87, that's 23 years, a long haul. People associate you with bringing in 95, trying to bring in the Wild Mammals Bill, which people would argue became the Hunting Act in 2004, which Tony Blair has often said he wish he hadn't brought it in because it caused a huge amount of division within the country. And I suppose some of it, if you were on the hunting side, would lay the blame at your doorstep for starting it. I mean, what was the... I'm not here to blame you, by the way, or take a position on it, but what was the motive that really gave you the fire to make this change?
Well, some of my colleagues were in League Against Cruel Sports. In fact, the leader, the opposition leader of the House, Angela Smith, she worked for League Against Cruel Sports, and I felt that was a worthy cause. I probably, in fact I'm sure, I never realised the cauldron in which I was going to be put in as a result of that. And some of my colleagues expressed dismay to me because there were, I think, more than 1 million cards came in on the hunting bill. I totally did not expect it. And
it was a huge outcry, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was over 1 million cards and a big societal debate on it. But my friend,
luckily there wasn't so much social media then, because you'd have been on the receiving end.
I would have been massacred, you know. But my colleague said to me, look, John, all these people are putting the postcards in. To them, you're like St. Francis of Assisi. But to us, getting all these cards, we think expletive, expletive, expletive.
So there was a great internal division. But how did you persuade Tony Blair that, or you and others, that he should pursue the hunting bill?
Well, it's a private member's bill and it's not government. So we have the freedom to choose what we wish. And Tony Blair had no part in that. But subsequent remarks from Tony Blair would say, look, maybe didn't fit in with New Labour and Fort Cortina Man or whatever. So that was it. But no, the opportunity. I remember, colleagues in the day we had the second reading. I think there was a big gathering in Newmarket, and they were listening into the debate. And at the end of it, the result was announced. I think it was something like 250 to 0, because they just allowed the second debate through. But the Countryside Alliance and others who gathered at Newmarket couldn't believe it when the bill got through, and it was 250 to 0 as a result of that. But their day came, particularly when it came to the House of Lords.
Yeah, exactly. And you spent time in the Northern Ireland office in 98 and 99. That must have been quite interesting.
It was right at the time of the peace process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was a lot of rebuilding to do there. And as a minister in Northern Ireland, it was much different than from being a minister in UK for the department, because the main aim of being a minister there was to bring the communities together. And remember back at the time, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, their voices were banned from the airwaves. David Trimble and Gerry Adams and others never met, never engaged. Then there was a step of them being in the same room, but they'd be in the same room and they wouldn't speak to each other as a result of that. So it was step by step by step which did it. And what I've said to individuals, and I was speaking last week somewhere, it wasn't the politicians who solved the problem in terms of getting them together. It was the people themselves, the social background, and people from all political parties and voluntary groups and whatever. And you were there, if you like, to hold the ring.
And as we said earlier, in 2010 you stood down as an MP, you became a peer, and now since 2021 you've been the Lord Speaker. What does the Lord Speaker actually do? I mean, how do you see your role? I mean, for the outside world. I mean, obviously I've got a rough idea.
As Lord Speaker, if you like, there's an anomalous position in that I am voted in by all members of the House. So you have this little island of democracy with the Lord Speaker element. But I'm very conscious as Lord Speaker that I've been elected by the members. So I make a big play of, if any member comes to the office or wants to speak to me, I engage them. And I think I've probably met individually and collectively over 300 peers. So that's the first job. Then there's the woolsack, and the procedural elements in the House are very dear to me.
And you're responsible for the procedure?
Yeah, and I'm on the committees for that. There's also the work of the Parliament in terms of restoration and renewal, and the Commission. I chair the Commission in the House of Lords. I engage in restoration and renewal and security, and those are really big issues, and many people don't see that in the background. And thirdly...
So the restoration and renewal, just explain.
Well, restoration and renewal, this building needs restored.
Yeah.
How are we going to...
And the budgeted bill at the moment is enormous, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But it's over quite a period of years. on that.
So the task is an onerous one of keeping this renewal and reconstruction under budget, which you are at the heart of. And of course, a lot of your job is ceremonial, so you travel and you receive heads of state.
Yeah, receive heads of state. For example, the South Korean president came and we addressed him. Mr. Zelensky came and we had an address in Westminster Hall. So that's a very important position. You know, in the Queen's death, Lindsay Hoyle and I, who are the key holders for Westminster Hall, we had to be there all the time there. And obviously it was a sober occasion, but I felt, my goodness, this is a real privilege to be here. And we were there until the very end when the royal family came to pay their respects before the cortege was taken to Westminster Abbey. There were no cameras, but we were in there to the very end, and it was, you know, pretty humbling.
And you've got the ceremonial state opening of Parliament which we had recently with the new king.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're in attendance, of course.
In fact, a number of my relatives have been down, but my son-in-law and one of my grandsons came down, and he's 9-year-old. And just before I enter the house, the attendant says, "Please stand up for the Lord Speaker." And Michael, it was, said, "That's the first time anybody's asked people to stand up for my papa."
Well, we do it the whole time and bow to you, which is even better as you walk back. I suppose the elephant in the room, and I don't want to get too heavily involved in it, is, of course, the future of this place. You've presided over actually a very functioning environment, and there is always the clamour, and your old work colleague Gordon Brown called for a total reform of it, having an elected chamber. Are you at loggerheads with him on that, or are you? I mean, you've gone public on it several times.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that there's such criticism of the House of Lords, and in many ways it's done on an ignorant basis. I'm passionate about a second chamber. That's very important. But I could have, if you like, stood in the corner and taken all the blows. And I've decided, no, I want to go out and explain the work that the House of Lords does. So I've had the Royal Society of Arts, spoken to them. I'm doing the Manchester University in a couple of weeks. And I've had,
what are you doing? Making a speech?
Making a speech and a lecture to them, yeah, and engaging with them. In fact, even today, I spoke to a Teachers' Alliance. About 70 or 80 of them came to Parliament and explained the House of Lords to them. And what I notice is that when you explain it, people listen seriously on that. And at the end of the day, you don't get the cheap shots because you've put it in context. It's a second chamber, it's unelected, but it is replete with people of experience. And they're near the end of their professional life, so they can reflect on the good things that's happened with them, but also on the failures. And that's really important. And at a time now when the House of Commons barely does scrutiny, and they'll tell me that themselves, because we have social media, and the focus is all outward for them. And there's also a guillotine. In other words, there's a short period in which they debate. But when they come along here, there is no guillotine. There's no programme motion. The Levelling Up Bill, for example, that when it came in day one, there were numerous amendments. On day 10, when we scrutinised it, there were more amendments than on day one. So we really do a proper job on that. And I remember sitting in the chamber when we looked at Article 50. And
Article 50?
Of withdrawal from the European Union.
Exactly.
And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, gave a date, we're going to come out in 6 months' time. So there was a feverish debate here. And
one of many.
Exactly. But I remember someone that got up and talking about Article 50, and they were followed by Lord Kerr of Kinlochard.
Yeah, of course.
And he said, "I'll tell you about Article 50, because as a former EU ambassador," he said, "I wrote it." And then he pulled a pen out of his jacket and he says, "By the way, I wrote it with this pen." So You don't get experience like that
No.
in the House of Commons.
No, he was the arch leader, really, of the Remainers, and as a brilliant advocate. You know, you've been in Dumbarton all your life, and not only have you seen great change in Scotland, but you've seen huge political change in Scotland, and particularly with the SNP, and actually the demise of the Labour Party in Scotland as well as the Conservatives.
Which was very dramatic.
It's been very dramatic. I mean, how do you see the future? I mean, you're obviously a unionist, and you fought hard for that. Where do you see the future in Scotland now, and what the view of the people of Dumbarton and the Glasgow area?
Well, it's mixed. When I look back to the referendum, say in 2014, the SNP gave a vision of Scotland and a narrative. Alex Salmond was very good at that. So it provided people with an optimistic future and hope. And I have to say, I don't think the unionist side did that to the same extent. But now there's a big debate in Scotland, and I've got to stay apolitical on it. But there's a huge debate now about delivery of services, be that the NHS, be it transport, be it education and whatever. And there's been the view that perhaps the administration has been focusing on the constitutional issue rather than the bread and butter issues. And I think the bread and butter issues are really important now, whether we're talking about England or Scotland.
And, I mean, if the pundits are right, there'll be a return for more Labour seats and probably less of a unionist campaign for independence.
Well, actually, I think there's at all times about a 40% support from the public for independence. So you've got to keep that in mind. And you've got to be very aware of everything that's Scottish. I was on the Economic Committee here, along with Michael Forsyth.
Who is a Conservative?
He was a bitter enemy of mine. But we got on very well now. But we were writing a report on the Bank of England and the implications for Scotland of engaging, with Scotland and England on that. And it really informed the debate. But I remember upstairs, when we got the report, the draft report, we sent it back at least 6 times, because Michael and I were of the same mind in that produce a report like that and 1 or 2 words can just make the difference. So you had to be forensic in that. We also took the view that we should go up to Scotland. So we went to Glasgow, we went to Edinburgh, elsewhere, showing that we were interested in it. And all the parties, I think except SNP, came to speak to us about it. So we had a legitimacy about it, the first thing. But secondly, we spoke that language in the report. And that was really important. And that's what Scottish politics is about. You've got to be very careful in your handling of that.
Well, John, it's been a remarkable story, yours. Leaving school at 15, having run round with the papers and all the rest of it. Now, Lord Speaker, it's an extraordinary achievement. It shows what can be attained if you look forward, and that's the unbelievable blend in the House of Lords. And I'm incredibly grateful for you sparing the time, because it's a fascinating story. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.